Welcome everybody to another episode of the Perceptive podcast here on Game Wisdom. I am Josh Beiser. We have a great cast for you today. After some technical shenanigans, we got everything fixed. And my guest tonight is the maker of the RPG that has perhaps one of the longest titles out there, not counting the Shin Megami Tensei franchise. It is, I have low stats, but my class is leader, so I recruit everyone I know to fight the Dark Lord. And yes, the abbreviation for that is also crazy as well. But he is on to talk about his game, as well as designing RPGs and kind of the RPG genre as a whole. So please welcome to the podcast, game developer Damian Crawford.
Hello, nice to meet everybody.
Yep, it's great to have you on, Damien, and it's great that we finally got things fixed as well.
Right. Great to be here.
But, like I was saying in our first part, thank you again for wanting to come on. It's always great to have new people on for these kinds of discussions. And we certainly have a lot to talk about here.
Yeah, no, I'm always up for game design discussion.
Alright, let me just get things centered. There we go. So, as we've said, there's a lot we can go over, but since this is your first time on the cast, for people watching us right now, could you kind of talk about your background when it comes to game dev, and of course, what is your game?
Okay, so my background in game development is, I didn't go to school for it. I ended up, I had an office job for a while that was making good money, better than Burger King before it, and I was messing around like, okay, well, I've had this idea for an RPG for a while, so, maybe I'll make that because I have enough money to buy an engine. So I bought RPG Maker VX Ace, and I started messing with stuff. And things started to go south at the job at the same time that I was spending more time working on the game and writing up a story, and I thought, okay, this has some legs to it, and a couple of my friends thought the same thing. And so then, I ended up just going full bore into it, and that's been the past 6 years. I've been working on several RPGs since then, and a couple others like a weird arcade-style game, a paperwork tabletop simulator, and right now a game where you play as 99 characters at once. So it's been a weird little path, but yeah, that's what I've been spending my time doing for a while now. It's weird to think that it's been 6 years now, getting closer to 7 every day. But yeah.
Oh yeah, and I have certainly heard that same phrase. It's been a weird path to get here. I think no indie dev has had the same exact path in terms of building their games or getting into the industry. So, just to clarify, what game engine are you using right now?
Right now, I'm using RPG Maker MV because it uses Java and is generally just easier to work with. Along with being able to prototype weird things and the game build faster than most other engines.
Yeah. And for people watching us new right now, we have spoken to a variety of developers in terms of how they build their games. We've had Unreal, Game Maker, RPG Maker. We've even had developers who've coded their own engines to build their own titles. And it really is, I'm sure you can probably agree with this too, Damon, it's really been, I think, a very big element in terms of, I guess, freeing up developers or freeing up people to get into the game industry with just so many game engines, not only in terms of their power, but in terms of their utility. Again, we were talking about this just before the cast, in terms of kind of the age of game development. When I was growing up back in the 80s and 90s, there was no way you were building a game by yourself unless you were, a master programmer, or you had lots and lots of money to hire a team to build it with you.
Or if you were making a roguelike and you didn't care how many people played the game.
Yep.
But yeah, it's interesting to see just how accessible game development is now. Um, you know, there's not only is there more tools than ever just because of the progression of time. Of course, there's going to be more tools than ever, but it's being made at a consumer level. Like game
Yep.
development is a hobby for a lot of people. Um, and there's plenty more people also getting into pixel art or voice acting and those things as hobbies that may eventually become jobs for plenty of people. Um, and it's really interesting to see just how much easier these sorts of things are becoming for people to be able to do, which I'm personally grateful for because, again, when I first started making games, I had no idea what I'm doing. And at this point, I know a couple of things that I'm doing, but not, I'm not good at code. I can't code from scratch. I can edit code at this point, but
Mm-hmm.
doing it from square one is something I can't do. Pixel art, I do a lot of character studies and whatnot to make sure that I know what I'm doing there. And I use a few different programs like Pixatool and Paint.net in order to make everything work the way that I need it to. Um, Music, I'm able to write music from scratch, but I'm not good at it. It's a laborious process, but I know how to edit MIDI files and deal with arpeggiations and whatnot to make something that still sounds unique. And then I can work from that and change the sound fonts and whatnot. Um, Indie dev for me is just a lot of cheating to get everything to work the way that I want it to, except for writing and design. But I mean, that's stuff that you can't really cheat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and as Shark says in the chat,
Mm-hmm.
we've spoken about kind of how big the game industry, especially in the game side, has gotten over the last decade. And there's definitely that argument that there's just so many games being released of varying qualities, as well as just in terms of the amount that comes out daily. Like
Mm-hmm.
every day, good 30 to 50 games are being released, and it does seem like it's getting harder for games, for quality games, I should say, to stand out. Not only in the game dev scene, but even just in the commercial side.
Right, right. Um, I mean, yeah, it's especially pronounced on Steam. That's one of the big places where everybody talks about it because it's just such a big area where there's just such an influx of games. And, most storefronts deal with the same sort of issue as well, um, where there's just so many games that are flooding it, and you have to have something that stands out in some way in order to make things work. Um, and that is something tough. It's a real struggle in the indie scene to figure out how to deal with that and get through it. I mean, if you're trying to turn a profit, if you're just making hobby games, that's fine. I mean, that's really what most people do on itch.io anyway, is just make student games or hobby games and, jam games and work off of that.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, for the most part, you have to have some good screenshots, some good trailers, some good GIFs that you're able to leverage in order to get any amount of visibility at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, it's tough. It's something that only a few people really know how to do really well, like Kit Fox Games, for example. Um, just because there's so many different things that they have going on, they have the whole marketing department and everything.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, and we, for the long time viewers watching, we
Mm-hmm.
all know we've had that discussion about what is an indie dev, and what does it mean to be an indie developer, or how do you define somebody as an indie? And I mean
Mm-hmm.
that's like a good hour and a half talk, depending upon who we have on for that. But like you said, Damien, we've seen that kind of, and you said it a few minutes ago regarding the growth of the hobbyist game developer, the person who's
Mm-hmm.
making games in their spare time, not with the intention of breaking a six-figure payday and retiring to fame and fortune, but just trying to make something and then hope that leads to possibly either a job in the industry or being a full-time developer. And it's definitely gotten, I think, very hard to see that line. As Shark was saying in chat, like, how would you define your game as like a, I guess, as a quote unquote, commercial game, or would you still consider it to be a hobbyist game?
Well, I'd say commercial because I'm working on it full time. Um, there's a lot of writing I've done for the story, and it's just sort of like it consumes all of my time. Um, so I guess that's why I would say that, simply because it's what I'm spending all of my time doing. Like, it's made enough money off of the Kickstarter and the occasional sales to where, I don't support myself well, but I support myself enough to get by. Um, so that's really the distinction I try to make with that.
And Mojo is asking a few questions about the game. We'll talk more about the design of that probably in our next section.
Sure.
But keeping with the topic about kind of being a game developer, I want to talk a little bit more about RPG Maker itself. Because I think, like with Unity, it has built up this rap as kind of being, the signifier that a game is bad. Like, we've seen many many consumers, they will say, oh, this game has made by Unity on the front, it's trash, pass. Now, obviously, we know otherwise. Now, with RPG Maker, I think we've kind of seen, unfortunately, some of those opinions develop as well. Like, obviously, since you're new, we do every Sunday, we have a live show where we talk design, but I also try to look at what games are coming out over the next week, and we have seen a lot of games that look like they've been made in RPG Maker, and it just doesn't look like the same level of quality that we've seen from other developers. But as somebody who's worked with it for so long, like, what do you think about that kind of opinion regarding like the quality that you can get out of RPG Maker?
Right. Well, a lot of people that use RPG Maker stick with the base assets, where it's just, like what comes with the engine or what they use with some of the DLC packs and whatnot, without any amount of editing or anything whatsoever. They're just like, okay, well, this is going to work, and this is what I'm going to use for my game. So there is that sort of opinion. The opinion's very strong with RPG Maker. I'd say more so than Unity, because RPG Maker games were flooding Steam Greenlight before Unity asset flips were. Yeah, it's a problem, but an important thing if you're trying to actually do more than just make a game that, like, if you're trying to make a game that actually makes money, you have to put the care into it that people would expect to be able to pay for it. Like actually working on art assets, and sound, and the OST and the sound effects for the battle and the battle animations and all of that, because RPG Maker comes with a great plethora of stuff, but everybody knows it, and you have to bring something new into the equation, because it shows that, okay, well, you didn't really spend that much time working on this then, if you just left all of this stuff as it was.
And like you said, like, we've seen like the quote-unquote asset flippers from the Unity side, and I think what you said there is a really good point about having original assets in your game, or even just modifying the pre-existing ones to try and make something that stands out. And it's one of those points I think is either lost, or a lot of people, at least starting out, don't really understand. Like, you can, like you said, and the same thing with Unity, you can get a lot of assets off of their respective stores, DLC, and for people who just want to make games from a mechanics standpoint, you could probably do all that. You could just use all those assets, put them together, and as long as you understand the design, that's a game. But the problem is, of course, that you're not the only one who's thinking like that. And again, Steam, Itch, and so many, and just about any other digital store out there that's kind of open has ran into that situation where you will see tons and tons and tons of games. And like we've loaded up like screenshots of some of these games where, again, it looks like someone just copy pasted an asset in and said, "Well, that's my game. It's done. Give me $10 for that." And this is, I think, this is another discussion that we could spend another who knows how long on. But there's definitely that issue of trying to show people the value of your game. Because there are games, and Shark, who released a game called Chromasia, he ran into this issue as well, that despite spending time with making original assets for it, people still just assume that it was like a low quality, I think it was like a low quality Unity or RPG Maker game, and nobody really wanted to give it that second look. And just trying to get people to understand, I guess, the work has been just a monumental process for people.
Yeah, no, it's a lot of work goes into the games. It is monumental. Especially, people trying to make, there's a lot of people trying to make classic RPGs. Like there was Sojourner that came out a while back, where it's very much, harkening back to original Dragon Warrior, that sort of thing, where it's very old art style. I don't think it's quite 8-bit, but I know it's close. Where, they're trying to make these 40-hour epics and everything, and then you start to realize, okay, there's actually a lot that goes into making a game this long, and also some considerations of, does a game actually need to be judged based on length, which a lot of, if Steam discussions are to be believed, yes, games are judged on length, but that shouldn't be the sole quality of something. We're seeing people take it to the almost opposite extreme, like there's JW and a few others who worked on Minute, which, you can 100% the game, 110% the game within 2 hours. And it's a $10 game, and people played it, and it was fantastic for everybody because, as a developer, it showed that a game can be judged based on its quality rather than its length. And also, there's a lot of game that you can squeeze down if you're actually making the effort to do so.
Yep. And like you said, with the RPG genre, the same could be said of platformers as well. Like, I did some research for my book that I just wrote about platforming design, and the platformer has been another go-to genre. Because, like you said, a lot of people consider it to be simple. Turn-based RPG, a 2D platformer, they've been around for now over 30 years, and a lot of people will assume that I can just copy Mario or copy Dragon Warrior or whatever, and I can make a game like that. But...
Yeah, there's just all the physics that go into it, as well as, how does it feel to actually play. Like Super Meat Boy is such a fantastic study in terms of platformers because it's an indie team that worked on it and made sure that the controls were super tight and good enough for a platformer to feel. Celeste is another recent one where... because there's the whole stamina mechanic, and they really changed some of the mechanics of the levels to where there's, wind and, shooting through all these different areas. That made it a really fantastic platformer. And it's not necessarily like platformers are hard to make, it's that a good platformer is hard to make, just like making a good game in nearly any genre is a difficult thing to do.
I gotta ask, is somebody mowing the lawn in the background? Because I'm hearing, like, a noise.
Yeah, that's, I guess there's the, landscaping.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure that I wasn't just hearing something there.
Yeah, no, that's... I do not have much control over that, but it is not hallucinations.
Okay. But, yeah, like, back to the topic,
Sure.
like you said, like... And it's the same that we've been saying here on the channel and all my writings, that it's easy, or quote unquote easy, to try and copy somebody else's design. But it's another matter entirely to understand why that design worked, and then, being able to iterate and refine it. And, like, for myself, like, when we play these games, like, there are just so many titles that, like, I know the developer put, their heart and soul into making this game.
Yes.
But as somebody who has played over, at this point, I must have played at least over 2,000 video games in my life, probably even more than that, it's kind of like, I can see the forest for the trees, but they can't. Like, they think I made this innovative, original game, it's the best damn game in the world, and the second I play, I see all these little design issues, quality of life, mechanics, etc., that, anyone who studied design, we see this like minute one. And it's that very weird economy of, I want to call them out on this, or I have to say this, but, I can never be mean. Like, I think that's the big thing. Like, I've never been able to get, visibly upset at a game. Like, there is no video of me screaming, oh, developers are lazy, they're stupid, and all that. But, yeah, no, Mojo. But, again, it's very hard, I think, to kind of separate the passion from kind of the process when it comes to making a good video game.
Yeah. Well, also, there is the difficulty of, when you're working on a project that you're spending multiple months on, it's very easy to get too deep.
Yep.
I'm constantly worried about, am I working on something that's actually worth anybody's time? But fortunately, I have, friends and play testers and stuff who are honest with me, and that's important, and that's something I care about a lot, is that when it comes to the choice of encouragement and criticism, I don't care about encouragement. Like, encouragement's nice. It's nice to know somebody's actually paying attention to what I'm working on.
Oh, yeah.
But the big thing to me is when somebody says, hey, I don't like how this works, or, oh, I'm having an issue with this thing. And I can go, okay, that's something I can work on. That's something that I know requires attention. Or at least should be looked at. There's plenty of times where somebody will say, something, and I will completely ignore it the first time around because that's just an opinion. But when a couple people say something, I'm going, okay, well then there's definitely something here, and I need to be spending my time on that. And sometimes I do it, and sometimes I don't. But that's also is this something I take care of later, or is this actually like a game-breaking issue? Like my first game, I had a beta testing where people were one person complained like, okay, well the first couple fights are really hard. Like, this just, I have to keep going back to town to heal all my characters. And I'm like, well, okay, but I know you. Like, I know you don't play that many RPGs. And then a couple other people said something. I played it, and the very first fight, I realized that enemies have crit chance, and I got really unlucky, and one of my characters fell on the first turn of the non-tutorial fight. So then I thought, okay, well, maybe I should pay a little bit more attention. But that's a good experience to have early on.
Yep.
And that's something that, it's important to be able to listen to people outside of your immediate circle. Because I've seen a few developers at GDC and whatnot who are like, oh yeah, we're launching our Kickstarter for this game. It's going to be like a throwback to Chrono Cross and Legend of Dragoon, like that whole PS1 era of RPGs. And I was like, okay. And I look at it and I play it for like 10 minutes and I said, so how are you doing beta testing? And they say, oh yeah, well, we're doing that all in-house with our team. And I'm like, stop. Just no. What's your schedule? Because if you're spending like not at least 1 or 2 extra months to do beta testing now, this is bad because you're not hitting good groups. Developers are not good beta testers. Like, they're okay beta testers because they have certain understandings of design and whatnot and are willing to do that deep dive. But people that are working on the game should never beta test because they're going to come in with so many assumptions. I had people, it was mostly 3 people that beta tested my first game and got like the good. It gave me an understanding of 3 core groups you need to have beta test games. The first core group is, your core demo, people who play a lot of this game. So I found, there's a couple of my friends who play lots of RPGs, so I talked to them, and they played it, and they'd say, oh, this boss seemed too easy, or oh, these fights seem too hard, or I don't understand how this works. And if they don't understand, and they play this type of game a lot, that's clearly an issue, and I need to fix that. So that's your first point. The second group is people who like to break games, who like to play puzzle games. These are the people that will check collision on everything, walk and check into every bookcase, every wall. There was a friend of mine who was like, yeah, I walked north and I got killed by enemies that were like 10 levels higher than me. I was like, how'd you do that? She was like, I just walked up this way. Like, oh, I forgot to set collision on the mountains in the world map. You missed 2 dungeons, 2 new party members, all this equipment and stuff. It was like, oh, this is abysmal. Like, this is a huge, huge game-breaking issue, and I didn't check because I assumed I did it already. I didn't walk into the mountains because I knew you couldn't, but you could. So that was awful, but important. And, she found various other weird little bugs that, there was one that was just a particular instance for her. I couldn't replicate it. Nobody I knew could replicate it, but I still figured out a way around it. She could actually play the game. So that's an important second group. And then the third group was people that don't play games. I sent a copy of my game for beta testing to my mom and my grandma. And I mean, they play a couple mobile games like Bejeweled and whatnot, but it's not, like this. And so they play it and go, well, I don't understand how this works, and I don't know how. I'm like, okay, that's great, thank you. I'll put in notes. I'll make sure that it is explained thoroughly, so that way we have a good tutorial and that anybody who is just getting into this type of game can actually get into it. And also make sure that any assumptions I have of people what to do are resolved immediately.
Oh, yes. And those are, excuse me, those are all really good points, Damien, about play testing and, again, about why this is important for anyone trying to make a commercial game. Again, if you're just making a little hobby game or something you don't intend to sell, do whatever you want, basically. I think that is kind of the way things go. But when you're trying to make something that you intend to sell, you need those eyes on your game. And like you said, I've heard from other developers who they don't do any beta testing, or as yet they just do it internally. And as we all know, it's very easy to get caught in the weeds of your game like that. And you develop those biases about, oh, I understand this, so and so, all these people must understand it as well. But if there's anything that I think is the biggest death nail for a lot of these indie games, is the fact that it feels like they have no sense of onboarding or no sense of educating somebody new about the game. And good tutorial design, is worth its weight in gold, I feel, for a lot of these games, especially, as we said, with the creativity and the uniqueness that comes from independent developers. We have played, I'm sure everybody watching, I'm sure you yourself, we've played indie games that have no other reference. They are unique titles that would probably never get made in the AAA space. And while that is certainly good, how do you can't expect someone to come into your game that has never been seen before and understand how to play it. And Mojo in chat is talking about that as well. Yeah, we've played games where I load it up and there's nothing. There is literally no tutorial. There is no mention about even what the controls are. And it's okay, I may be somebody crazy enough to try and figure this game out, but no consumer, especially in today's market, is going to buy a game and then try and guess how it works for the next 3 to 5 hours.
Well, it's You see it definitely primarily with indie games.
Hmm.
Um, but there's also something I learned when I was working on I basically worked on a small project where I was trying to make an arcade game, an RPG maker, because I thought it'd be a neat thing to try and do. Um, and I ended up making it, and it's an interesting game. But the thing I learned from that is trying to make something where the mechanics teach you the game. Like, it doesn't give you any directions on how to play it. Um, but it's basically Pac-Man, you know? You move around, you try and dodge enemies, you grab 4 keys, and you make it back to the door where it's an exit. Um, that's the whole point of the game. The enemies have their own sorts of behaviors, just like the four ghosts in Pac-Man, but a bit different. Like there's one enemy that's a ghost that moves at half of your speed, but also can go through walls. Little things like that. And then as you progress, there's some tricks like floor panels that force you to move a certain direction but don't affect enemies. So it was a neat take, but it was also something that I enjoyed doing a study on that helped me inform other parts of my design, like how do I set up RPG battles that make sure the player understands what they're doing just a bit better, and also kind of how to explain narrative through combat scenes and gameplay themselves. Because arcade games did it so fantastically. Like, arcade games didn't really have much in the way of text or anything, and yet you still understood everything that was going on.
Yeah.
And it's great whenever I've gone to, little shows and stuff, because, this current game, my 99 character RPG, doesn't really, you can't get too far into it when you're playing it at a show where everybody's like walking around checking tables. It's fine to have a trailer of it up on a monitor and people like look at it and understand what's going on. But playtesting the demo is a bit awkward in that setting. Whereas with, the arcade game Hero Run, the whole point of that was like, I could be talking to somebody about games, and some 6-year-old would come up, start playing on my laptop, and then after dying 3 times, they already knew all the rules of the game and could get through it. Well, maybe not get through it. It was kind of, took some reflexes. But they at least understood it. There was a possibility to win without me actually ever telling them what to do. And I think that's something that's really important, and also a good reason to, not just work on the same genre or what you're comfortable with all the time, because it helps you get better perspective.
Yeah. And like you said, like it's very easy like to kind of get stuck when it comes to making these games and not understanding, or more importantly not understanding like what can be a successful game, because any developer out there has made prototypes. I think it's just kind of the way of life, especially in the independent scene. But knowing when an idea is good enough that I can commit a year, 3 years or more of my life to making this game versus just taking what I've learned and move on to the next is a very difficult skill to have. And there are so many like soft skills when it comes to game development that I don't think get enough praise. Again, project management, being able to organize yourself, and just being able to, again, take that hard look at your game and go, okay, I made this game, but do I think other people will want to play it? Because again, we've seen developers who, the second they get a game, they'll put up on a store, or they'll just say, this is done. I'm going to, this is going to be my magnum opus. I'm going to spend 5 to 10 years of my life making this game, and then 5 to 10 years later, why is somebody buying this game I just spent the last decade working on?
Yeah, I'm gonna need to just vent for a few minutes. So starting off with prototyping, if you're thinking about making games, prototyping is so important. Like, there's a term in business, minimum viable product, or MVP. What that means is, what is the smallest, most basic version of this product that you can get out for people to look at? and see if they're interested in. And that is incredibly crucial if you're trying to make commercial games, because you need to have a fast turnaround. If it's a game that's a bad idea, you need to know as soon as possible before you waste any amount of extra time on it. Like, I'm a solo studio. I do everything on my own, technically. I mean, I buy art assets, do modifications and stuff, and like, I don't make fonts, I just buy fonts. But when it comes down to actually doing like all the inputting into the engine and the writing and the design and stuff, that's all me. So it's very important that I use my time efficiently, because I only have so many hours in a day between my one person. Which is another reason when I have the money to spare, I buy assets, because that means that I'm cutting down the amount of time I'm spending on everything. And time is money for me. So it's about figuring out, okay, what's actually a valuable cost. But I don't spend more than a month working on a prototype, and sometimes I spend about a month. But that's like my hard limit, is after 30 days, I just say, okay, post it up on the itch.io page, we'll see if it gets any traffic. And so I have like several demos on there where it's, I've wanted to mess around with the idea, I posted it up, and it got no traffic at all. And so I said, okay, well, maybe I'll come back to that. Maybe I'll like discover something that I want to use that for later. So I still have the files, but by and large, that's just not going to get touched again. Which is why I'm working on this one, because when that demo came out, it got traffic. Some people were very upset with me because the game was so obtuse and annoying to play, because it was a 99 character turn-based RPG where you had to confirm 99 commands and then wait 45 minutes for a turn to play out and repeat and hope that you started actually gaining understanding of the game. Which, I mean, I just made it because like my games weren't doing well and I was angry and I had enough money to kill a month. That's the reason. And then people started talking about it. Like, I got emails personally about how awful the game was. I got emails that were dissertations about what they'd like to see the game become in the future. It was very polarizing. There's nobody has a middling opinion about the game. They're either they love it or they hate it. But I was actually getting feedback, which was fantastic, because I might post a game and somebody I know will tell me about the game because they follow me and they want to make sure, like, oh, encouragement. It's like, okay, well, I appreciate it, but it's just not getting anywhere. Whereas this, it was like anybody that knew me knew they shouldn't play the game. And then all these other people just started talking to me, and I was like, well, okay, maybe we'll, double down and give this a real shot. And so now I've actually started working on making it a full game. That's why it's on like its 4th combat system iteration and everything, because I've been working really hard to make sure that the combat doesn't get too bogged down, everything's smooth, there's a variety of different combat situations to get into. Even situations that aren't combat have a way of being resolved. Like, there's one of like the second fight in the game is with a guild master who you're trying to get supplies off of, because you need to supply 99 people and a lot of freaking people. So only skills that do, legal damage, financial damage, social damage will work on the guildmaster. Any skills that do the standard sort of like slashing, fire, piercing, do nothing. Likewise with status effects, you can't poison the guildmaster, but you can make him suffer from payback, from like loan defaults and whatnot. So it's a lot of weird mechanics that I'm getting to implement, and I'm having a lot of fun with messing with it that way. But that comes from working on a prototype and not getting too attached, and making sure to work on other projects sometimes to make sure I maintain perspective. Because I do want this game to be the best. It's not the prettiest, it's a 32 color palette, and I am very much trying to make sure that the pixel art is good, or at least as good as I can get it. But the big thing is making sure that it doesn't get bogged down and that the gameplay itself is enjoyable. Like, that's my prime concern above everything else.
Yeah.
But yeah, the other point was, people like Owlboy, they spent 9 years working on that game.
Something like that.
Yeah, you hear that regularly where it's like 5 to 10 years was spent on this. It's like, well, okay, but what if it wasn't that good? We've got a lot of games out there that people spend a long time on, and it wasn't that good. My very first game, I spent 2.5 years working on it, and like to this day, I still feel like the combat system is fantastic. But everything else in it's not good. Like, the writing is bad. Like, there's a couple scenes that I'm like, well, that still stands. Like, I think that was really well done. Of course, it's the comedic scenes, which is, a lot of what I'm writing now for this game, because why make a game with this ludicrous of a premise and not go comedy? But there's just so much that I look back on it, I'm like, oh, that was bad. That just, like, I know why it didn't do well. It's also important to look back and understand and how to change that in the future, and that is make prototypes, make small things, make them quickly, and then get that out there for people to test and give feedback on, because otherwise that's just, eternal development hell. Yeah.
And a few questions came in from chat. So how many games have you made so far? Like, that either got to the prototype stage or are available for people to look at?
On my itch page, you can see pretty much everything I've worked on. I think there's a couple games on there, but most of them are. But there's I don't know, probably 10 different ones. This one and Legend of Moros are the ones that I spent the most time on. And then the rest, there's generally some amount here and there. I've got 2 tabletop systems that are, they need fleshing out. Because tabletop, I want to get into tabletop systems. I've played tabletop games for a long time. I owned at least half the books for Dungeons and Dragons 3.5 edition, which there is a horrendous amount of books for that. So, I've played Shadowrun and a few others where, I like tabletops, and so I thought, okay, well, tabletop games are really focused on writing and design, and that's what I feel I'm good at, so why not try that? And now, after I've been trying to work on a couple, I'm like, oh, this is why you have those books that have 3 pages of credits, because of all the people that worked on it, because this is a nightmare for one person to do, because with a video game, I can obfuscate battle formulas. With tabletop systems, I can't. Along with, rules for interacting with NPCs and encounter tables and enemy variety. I have to take everything that I put behind the scenes of a game and explain it in complete detail to make sure that nothing is lost. And along with all the stuff that you don't have to worry about in the games that I make, interactions. To where that's just, it's so much work.
Yes.
But to answer the question, I've worked on 10 different things, varying in size and scope. This is definitely my biggest project, especially now that I've planned out how the story is pretty much set up. It's a big one, but I'm also making sure to check everything along the way. It's been 6 years of this, so I know my art's not great, but if you look at Legend of Moros, you'll understand my art's not as bad as it was.
And I'm not an artist by any means, so I cannot comment when it comes to good or bad art myself.
Fair.
But again, there's so much we could talk about when it comes to game development. I know we are about 49 minutes into after our whole restart there. I guess in terms, we'll move on to talking about the game from a design standpoint next. Before we do that, are there any topics, I know we'll talk about kind of the age issue later on, but any other topics relating to game dev or indie game dev you feel like discussing now, Damien?
something might come up when I'm talking about the game, so I'll probably end up going off on a tangent or two about that. Um, but I feel like I've done enough ranting on that for now.
All right. So let's talk a little bit more about it, and I guess what would be the easiest way to reference it? Because we're not going to be using the abbreviation, that's for sure.
Right. I usually just talk about it as my 99 character RPG.
Okay.
So if we need to talk about it by title, we can just say that instead, or my RPG, whatever.
Okay.
But yeah, the full title is a mouthful. Definitely take it. Okay, so let me explain the title a little bit. So the full title of the game is I have low stats, but my class is leader, so I recruited everyone I know to fight the Dark Lord. And I mean that's the pitch. That's the whole game. You start off in town, you recruit literally everybody, and then fight the Dark Lord as the tutorial fight. And then it's like, okay, well, you still have, more to do. Like, it wasn't the real one as per, It's really just me making fun of a lot of RPG tropes. Although some I leave out, like bikini armor, because I really don't care about that. But when it comes to the title, I was really inspired by light novel scene in Japan, because I do keep up with, that kind of scene. Like there's some fantastic weird titles that they have for stuff, but the whole system behind that is it makes it stand out because it's such a competitive, saturated scene, much like independent game development. So the point of the title is to make sure that it does stand out, it does get the point across. It does cause problems when people want to look up the game. Like if I'm at a show or something, because that means that I have to take out one of my little business cards and write down the full title on the back of it. Excuse me. But at the same time, it has a fantastic SEO rating. Like people will look for other games and they'll find mine because I have analytics set up to where I can see how people find my game. And I get some weird hits. But yeah, it's really interesting to see the sort of impact that title's made. But that's the whole purpose behind it, is really it stands out and it gets the point of the game across. The title is the pitch, and that helps work everything out. And plus, like, I can type the title, I post a GIF on it on Twitter, and then people understand entirely what the game's about.
So, I gotta ask, was there any point where you were thinking of even having a longer title for the game?
Yeah, not for this one. I did talk with a friend of mine about are you planning to do a sequel? And I thought about it and I was like, well, yes, but first off, way down the line, but I do have a title for it. Because the title for this game is 96 characters long. So the next one I need to have it 99 characters long.
No.
I have to do some adjustments. But yeah, I'll probably end up making a really awful sequel to this, depending on how it does. Or if enough people just ask, like, do it for the meme or whatever.
You could throw in like the words like Ultra, Gaiden, Enhanced,
yeah,
Super
there was
Neo.
There was a bullet hell game that I played that was like Neon Squadron or something, but then they like the sequels like Neo Squadron EX Turbo Edition or whatever. I mean, the most famous versions like Street Fighter 3, which had like Turbo EX Alpha Edition Plus or something, like totally ridiculous. Which I might do that eventually. I'm not gonna rule it out, but yeah, I think this title is probably as long as I should let titles be for a while. It's tough enough.
Another question that came in terms of the character art, did you do the art yourself, or did you kind of buy assets and modify it for the various people?
For the character art, what I did for that was I used this sprite generator that's in the engine, and then I do modifications to it. Like I use Pixatool for that, where I convert the art over to the palette that I'm using of 32 colors. Um, and then I mess with, I generally double the gamma. Um, then I, add a little pixelation to it, or dithering. Um, and then, there's a couple other minor adjustments, but that's basically it for the character art. And then for the faces, I just, double the pixelation. So it get, along with all the other previous adjustments mentioned. So it gives it, a couple people have asked like if I, got it off of, Fire Emblem style, that sort of thing. So I take that as a compliment. But yeah, it's a lot of editing the base assets, or at least what you can make base assets out of with the generator. But it was still important to me to get a unique style for characters while at the same time not spending years making character designs.
And that kind of takes me to my question then.
Sure.
In terms of like, I haven't had a chance to play yet. How does this game play with you having 99 characters to go through? As you said earlier, like, the original version was like a turn took like 45 minutes to go
Oh
through.
yeah, it was awful. So how combat works in this game, generally, is that there is an aggro system. So what happens is, excuse me, you can hit the left and right keys to switch between characters that you want to have take actions. So if you're like, oh, this character's low on HP and I need them for this fight, you can just swap over to one of the healer characters and just spam healing on them until you run out of HP if you want to. But it's really just very free form. You get to pick whoever does whatever. I initially had it the full turn based, which sucked. Then I had it to where it was a CTB gauge. So once your speed stat was high enough and it filled up, that character would take their action. We'd still go through them all. But it was very hard balancing bosses that way. Because, the action efficiency was just terrible by comparison. And so I thought, okay, well, what if I have, like, after they take a hit, they, fill up a bit of their meter so they're not being totally awful. But then I ended up setting it up to where it is now. So you swap between characters and you take actions as you wish. And then after you take an action, it fills up a aggro meter, which is dealt with through variables. Once it hits a certain threshold, the enemy takes their turn.
Okay.
It's roughly, like, on average, it's, you take 4 actions and the boss takes 1. But, yeah, that's the way that system works. You can go through and buff your party members with whatever you want and use skills, and then the boss will take their turn. There's combo skills, there's support skills where characters will follow up certain other characters, depending on, like, their relationships and everything. But yeah, it's a lot smoother now. There's still some issues with being able to find characters that are good for certain fights that people complain about. But outside of that, it's not too hard once you get accustomed to it. The first fight is almost intentionally obtuse. Like, I just throw you into a fight with all 99 characters and say, okay, well, enjoy yourself, have fun. But then I start having other fights where you've only got, anywhere from 8 to 15 characters. There's an example, I think it's the 5th fight, where you're fighting a ghost, but it's like nighttime and everybody's camping, so you're off collecting firewood with a few characters. And then you get ambushed by a ghost. And so it's like 8 of you against this character. But then you start to understand, okay, well, maybe well, let's look through all of them to see what they can do. And it's like, oh, these two have a combo skill that reduces the enemy's evasion, and this ghost is really evasive, so let's use that. And now that puts into the player's mind, okay, I know about this combo now for the future. And along with, several of the other characters' skills and how they interact with each other in that group. So that way, after that, whenever you do fights, it's like, okay, I'm coming across this situation. Oh, I know who to use. Like, one of these characters is really good for this. So it's a lot of fights where, yes, you just have access to everybody and you can move around pretty easily, but also there's, I make sure to take you aside and say, hey, just use these characters for a little bit. Like, just get a feel for this. Because at the start, I want you to feel confused a bit, but I also want to have moments where I take you aside to where by the end of it, you know all the characters, you know what they're all capable of, and you're conducting this DPS orchestra to take down the last area of the game.
Okay.
So that's how the game's supposed to play.
Mojo is asking, so do you lose any characters? Like, is there permadeath, or once they're unlocked or recruited, they're with you for life?
There is no permadeath, but there are no revive skills. So if a character gets knocked out in a fight, I hope you didn't need their type of elemental damage against this boss, because there's only a couple people that deal each type. So there's no permadeath. Like, everybody gets a full restore at the end of every fight. But there's not, but it's still like, there's no permadeath is what I'm going to answer the question with. Though, there's limited combatants for certain fights, and there are no revive skills. So you still want to be careful with certain characters.
Okay. As you're describing the game, Damien, I'm getting, like, in my head, I'm remembering the game, I think it was a Valkyrie Profile for the PS1. I think it was PS1, PS2. Did you ever play that series?
I know about the game. I've never actually played it. So I'll have to look at that.
I think I've only played, like, the second or third one. But the reason why it's, like, popping in my head is that you do, like, recruit, like, random people to your party. Now, in that game, they do eventually, like, the game kind of wants you to get rid of them, once you've gotten everything out of them. But it's very interesting about, I know this will probably come up in our next section for our discussion, about we don't see too many RPGs kind of go for, like, almost like the crowd of characters. It's always, like, you have your 3 or 4 chosen ones, and that's it.
Yeah, it's, you see, one of the things that inspired me to go this particular route, where the emphasis is a lot on character relationships, is Final Fantasy 15. It's because 14 is the online one, I think, so I think I'm talking about 15, where it's, you've got your Crown Prince Noctis and his 3 homeboys, and you're cruising around, and you're just having a good time, like coming up with a new recipe and eating ramen on the side of the road and going on a road trip. And I was like, well, this is kind of like a gigantic field trip. Like, you have in your party several ex-adventurers who, like, your parents fought the Dark Lord before, and that's why you're like the supposed chosen one for this. It's like you're going to be the one that has to take the Dark Lord down. But you also just don't have any combat skill whatsoever, and so you just talk to everybody in town because you have fantastic charisma. And they're like, okay, we'll go with you here. I know where we have to go and do all this stuff. So it's like just a big town-sized field trip. So you get a lot of interesting interactions with characters. And, I was first looking at this trying to go for, difficult combat situations, really interesting, difficult fights. And now I'm leaning more towards it doesn't have to be difficult to be interesting. Also because balancing fights with this system is not impossible, but very difficult. Because last month I was spending just a ton of time trying to do combat testing. And I ended up making an enemy that just buffs herself constantly, and if she's not buffed, she punches somebody for like 600 damage, which one-shots most characters if they don't have very high physical resistance. And that's still like she was one-shotting like two people a turn, and I still won, like not really that hard, just because there were a couple people I knew what to do and I knew to buff them up, and then that was it. And it's a strategy that works with most of the characters in the game because I didn't give her any particular resistances or anything. So when it comes to combat balance and everything for this, that's why I decided, no, let's... because a couple people said, well, it'd be interesting if it was like, a roguelike in that sense, where, you want to try and keep everybody alive, or like again, Fire Emblem, where there's the classic difficulty is when a character dies on the battlefield, they die for real. But with this, I said, no, let's have this, like, I want to make sure there's the full interaction throughout the end of the game. Like, I don't want to have this where people want to reset or have to feel like they missed out on something, or, have these really tragic moments. The focus is to, you've got an objective, but at the same time, like, let's have fun with this. And I like having fun with my RPGs, so I figured that was more the way to go, more the sort of Earthbound route.
Mm-hmm. And another RPG series that came to mind that I'm surprised nobody has mentioned yet in chat was Suikoden. That famous series where you recruit, I think it's like 100 people per game of varying skills, personalities, and whatnot to get through that title.
Yeah, that has... it's generally like 108 characters, I think. But the issue with how Suikoden does it is they focus on a couple of characters, and then that's kind of it. Like, some of them have, like, they'll touch on their backstory a little bit, or, I mean, for many of the late game ones, you just have it where there's like a sentence exchanged, and then they're in your party, and that's it. Whereas with this, the focus is very much on the interaction, on, developing the characters and their story and, their relationships with one another. It's a more narrative-focused RPG, whereas Suikoden is, it is somewhat narrative-focused, but like in the sense of war and destiny, whereas this is, I'm doing this more as comedic. Using all these different characters to get into interesting situations, and not caring about the seriousness of the story so much. Like, you'll end up going through different worlds and whatnot. Because it's a somewhat isekai type title, I figure may as well throw you into weird areas and situations where you can totally get out of it, but it still lets me, experiment with different sorts of combat situations, as well as character interactions. That's my focus, rather than just, military RPG where you have to defeat the opposing side in a war. There's plenty of good RPGs that do that already, and I don't really care to do that for my own story.
And one thing that I wanted to ask, from your page, and actually before I do that, quick question from Mojo: how long is the demo on the niche?
The demo is World 1, which is 8 different fights, and the reason that worlds are formatted in a Super Mario Brothers-esque way is there's no traveling from point A to point B, or getting lost along the way, or looking around to try and find a treasure chest in this area. It's outside of World 4, because that's a literal labyrinth that I make you go through. But that's why the worlds are set up that way, is because it's like I'm just taking you from actual point of gameplay to other actual point of gameplay, which was a very important game design thing for me, because it's not about random encounters, it's about character development, so let's just get you from each point of character development.
Okay. News ask, you mentioned Iski. Was the game's name inspired by How I Became a Slime?
It was not inspired by that one, but it is definitely inspired by the light novel scene. Um, because a lot of isekais also go that route, even if they were manga before light novels. Which I do keep up with that series and I like it. Um, because it does take on uh, well, lots of them go for the sort of power fantasy where it's like you end up in this new world and it's just you're super overpowered. There's actually a character in your party that is a isekai character. Like her name's Ayako. Her class is student, and she came from another world, but she's just the same as everybody else, except that her skills deal financial damage because she can use things like student loan and lunch
Oh
money and
no.
things like that to make enemies feel bad and pay for her and thus deal them financial damage. um, but yeah, it wasn't inspired by that scene entirely, but I've definitely referenced that scene.
Okay. Now, one question that I had, and this one I was thinking about while reading the itch page, is that you mentioned there
Hmm.
is no leveling system in
Yes.
the game. And
Yes.
I think that's a very interesting point because, as you said, like with this game, you're trying to kind of combine a lot of the tropes and designs of traditional JRPGs while still
Hmm.
dealing with this insane premise of having 99 characters.
Hmm.
So, I guess from a design standpoint, how did you decide, I guess, what aspects to include in your game and which ones you wanted to ignore or just not have or just downplay them, I guess?
That's a great question. Because, when it's important to know when to double down and when to let off the gas. It's I'm trying to hit that balance of, this is interesting, but it's not so complicated and obtuse that five people will play it who are like the same people that play every single Armored Core game and stuff, where it's like, I'm here for the overly complex things. I'm here to, play Disgaea and level up to 9,999. Um,
I've yet to do that in any of these games
no,
myself.
I've gotten up to like 1,000 in a couple of them, and that's like real grindy in and of itself.
Yes.
Where it's like we're just repeating the same cave ordeal, floor three, repeatedly just to hit that same 3x3 tile of enemies.
Hmm.
Um, it's like I like the games. I like grid-based tactical games, but those get to be a bit much, and so. A big thing that's important to me is making sure that if I'm going to make a game like this, I have to make sure that I hit the right level of complexity. I don't want it to take so long to understand that nobody makes it through the whole game. Because that's something that happens to a lot of people. It happens to me plenty of times where I've played an RPG and I'll get like a portion of the way through and then I never touch it again. Excuse me. But I feel like that's such a huge failing. I want people to get through the game, play it all, and feel fine with that. Feel like okay, everything's resolved on a good. If they want to play it again, cool. If not, they don't feel like they missed out on anything. Um, but it's important to me to hit that balance. So you have a lot of characters in the game. You have access to a lot of skills in the game. And it is an RPG, so what are we talking about in terms of progression? Because I give you all of the characters really early on in the game. I initially thought about having it to where you recruit characters as you go along, but I talked with a couple people and they felt like that was kind of losing the plot a little bit. Where, like, if I'm going to get this game, why wouldn't I want access to doing all of that as soon as possible? And I agree with that sentiment, so I said, okay, well, we'll just keep that in, but what are we going to do in terms of progression? And so I thought about, okay, well, leveling, we'll have a leveling system, and then I thought about, well, if we have leveling, how are we going to balance everything out? Are we going to let you level up certain characters, which might end up screwing everything up for you later on, or if we have everybody level up, but you're progressing further in the game anyway, because we're trying to streamline this as much as possible, then this is going to get just bigger numbers, and there's no point to that. And then I thought about skills, adding more skills as you progress through the game. And I thought, well, if we do skills, why do we even need a leveling system? And so I thought, yeah, that's a really good point. So there's no leveling system. A couple characters will get equipment and skills as you go through the game. But equipment isn't even... the equipment's still something I'm working on, because I'm trying to make it impactful enough to be interesting, but I'm going more like a Soul Calibur 2 route, where like weapons have modifiers. So some are better to keep the character alive, but mean that they won't be doing as much damage output, or okay, well, this gives the character wide boost of stats, but also increases all their MP costs, things like that. So progression is something that is less the focus about, like, there's still some focus about it, because you get character skills and certain combo skills and support skills open themselves up to you as the game goes on. But in terms of leveling, I just felt like that would be too much and unnecessary. Because, yeah, it's not actually important to what the game's about. The game's about the player themselves learning about how the characters work, and the characters learning about how they interact with each other and themselves and their relationships. So, that's why no leveling.
Okay. Now, I guess, as we talked about in the first part of our discussion, with regards to understanding when the game comes together or knowing when to kind of move forward with it. Mm-hmm. With this game, obviously, as you said, you spent about 6 years on it so far, going on 7. I guess, what was the point that you kind of felt like, I can do something with this idea? Like, as you said, the original version of this game was, a lot of people had some very strong opinions about it. I guess, mm-hmm. When did things kind of click together for you with the game?
That's tough. I would say mostly, when I started getting so much feedback, I started working on the game a bit more. And then when I would do an update, I would get more feedback, and so I thought, okay, well, I'll put a little bit more time into this, and then, that just kind of became a loop of, I work on the game, people give me feedback, I continue working on the game. And that's kind of why it's gotten to the point it has today with this particular one. As far as, I guess you could call it my games career in general, after the first game, even though it didn't do so well, I took a hiatus for a couple of months, but then I got back into it and, just kept working on stuff because there was nothing else I actually spend my time doing. So that's why I'm still working on this now.
Okay. I'm trying to think. One thing I wanted to ask you about, with regards to, I guess, patching or releasing updates to it, that's another one of those very fascinating aspects of game development that a lot of people don't think about. Some will say, oh, I'll just patch it whenever. Others will say, I'll just have a weekly update, and it will be perfect. With this game, I guess, how often do you update it? Like, do you have a fixed schedule for it?
I try to have a fixed schedule for it. I try to get an update out every other week. Which, this time I'm going to hit it. Last month was a pretty rough time because I finished up a lot of concepts for enemies, but I was still working on fleshing them out, where they'd go into the story and everything, and that took a lot out of me. But now at this point, I've actually, gotten that sorted out, and I've gotten a lot of the writing done for, the future of the game, like planned out the various levels and quests and whatnot. So at this point, I'm trying to get an update out every other week. I really hope I keep to it. but it's tough to do that sort of regular update schedule.
Yes.
Well, because the big thing is when is too often not. Because if you do it often at the right time, that gets enough attention on your game for people to play it. If you do it too often, you end up not having very impactful updates, and then nobody's really interested when you update. And if you do it too infrequently, then when you get out an update, it's good, but you're not getting enough baseline traffic anymore for people to actually pay attention to your updates. There's a weird happy medium that you have to hit, and it's tough to hit that because there's some games are different than others in that respect. There's like Caves of Cud, which is a roguelike that updates every week. And then you have games like Path of Exile, which do their updates every 3 to 4 months. Which, bigger game studio and everything. But also, yeah, it depends on your game, and you have to kind of figure that out on your own. Where is that happy medium? Because it's important to hit marketing perspective. Especially if you're doing, Steam and other such sites, because they'll have, there's every so often that you do an update, they'll actually do some promotion, like they'll make sure that it gets a higher ranking.
Yep.
And people searches so that way they can find it. Excuse me. Which again, yeah, you want to figure out where is that perfect medium.
And we've seen there's a lot of developers who go the early access route of trying to commit to a very rigorous schedule and realizing that they just can't keep up with that demand. And it can be very hard to set something for you, especially as an independent developer, when you are essentially your own boss as you're trying to get this game made.
Yeah, self-motivation is a tough thing. But yeah, there's it's tough to figure out what that good schedule is, especially with an early access, because there's a lot of ways to do it wrong and only so many ways to do it right. Especially if you're going into early access, you need to have a push that people expect. And that's tough to actually, like it's a miracle any game ever gets made. It's something that I've heard a few times and I believe in, because there's so much that goes on with making a game and figuring out pacing, dealing with all that marketing, and how will players respond to this, on top of the programming, the art, the music, the code and the engine, everything, and making sure it all works together well. So no, I feel for everybody that's early access or tries to make a game and is trying to figure out what's the right way to do this.
Now, in terms of a quick time check, we're about an hour and 20 in. So I figure we'll spend a few more minutes on the design, and then we'll talk a bit more about our final topic. But if anyone has any more questions, definitely leave them in the comments below. I guess in terms of from a gameplay standpoint, are there any other aspects of the game that we haven't touched on that you'd like to bring up?
I'm sorry, you disconnected, but then it got fuzzy.
Yeah, I'm losing you there. Uh-oh. Could it be Discord? Can you guys still hear me alright on the stream? Uh-oh. Damien is frozen. Wait. Test. Can you guys still hear us? Worst comes to worst, we'll just wait. I think it's stabilizing.
Okay.
Let's see. Try saying something, Damien.
Okay, let's give that a shot.
Yeah, it's acting a little stuttery. Let's end the call really fast, and I'll call you right back and see if that fixes it. Alright, it's On Air Tech Support Part 2. Alright. Testing.
Hello.
Okay, you're sounding better there.
Okay.
Yeah, it could have been just like some internet issues, or it could have just been like Discord.
Right, right.
Let's see. I think Shark was asking, like, looking at the Gio page, it looks like there's different art styles, or like there's like different looks to the game.
Hmm.
I guess is that just like the different iterations of the project, kind of?
Yeah. There's. I need to finish working on the tile sets. That's one thing that I'm kind of just. I'm putting tile sets in to just get them done to make sure the town works and everything, and then I'm gonna go for like a good second and third pass over them to make sure that they're actually matching the quality that I want them to. But yeah, it's still a very fresh game that I'm adding stuff to constantly. So yeah, there is some clash, and I am very aware of it, and it will be fixed.
And I think that's another very interesting point. Like getting back, like when we were first talking about Game Maker or RPG Maker, in terms of things from an art standpoint. Like I think from the outside and for myself, it looks like it's a very basic aesthetic in terms of designing a game around. But from the work that you've done with it, I guess what are your thoughts, or like how has things changed in terms of defining an aesthetic in RPG Maker?
That's tough. Basically, I mean, like one of the big reasons that I'm going for this sort of aesthetic um, is the fact that I'm trying to minimize the amount of resources that the game's using. I don't want to go for like full on NES or Game Boy Color or anything, because then I don't have enough to really get the variations that I want for characters. Um, but at the same time, I'm I don't want to go too full on with palette diversity, because I'm not that good of an artist. I'm going to miss highlights and lowlights somewhere, and people will point that out. Um, Also, using a restricted app palette due to the fact that there's so many characters on the screen that any amount of data that I can parse down for the game lets it run just a bit smoother is completely necessary. Um, the game engine is not built to handle this many characters. Um, like, just because it can doesn't mean it wants to. So it's been a lot of figuring out what can I do to parse things down and tear out to make sure that this actually functions. Um, I mean, that's one of the big considerations for the aesthetic there. Then in terms of some of the things like, the tree designs or the world map, how, certain areas have different sorts of things. Like there's the desert area where the cacti are pink, and it's like, that's just, me kind of wanting to make sure that everybody understands. This isn't like, standard stuff. It doesn't matter what that looks like because it's not actually consequential to anything. It's just, it gives a nice contrast, and it works for what I'm trying to tell it. So, yeah, it's the aesthetics kind of a consideration, but it's more to service the rest of the game.
Okay. I'm trying to think if there's anything else design-wise. So I have a question for you. I guess here's one that I've been thinking about. Again, the fact that the game has 99 characters. Like, did you sit down like at the start and kind of sketch out exactly all these characters, or did it kind of like blossom as you were designing the game?
Um, so when I started off with this idea, I was really just seeing. I was first testing out how many characters could I actually put in the game engine. So I started with 20. And when I entered, first off, when I was walking around, it actually trailed behind me like I was hoping it would. And so I thought, okay, well, we've got, square one down. And then when I entered a combat scene, they just trailed off the side of the page because of how the spacing between characters was set up. And I thought, okay, well, let me tighten that up and figure that out. And then once I did and it still worked, I was like, oh, okay. How many can I put in here? Let's just do 99. I feel like if I go into the triple digits, it's going to get weird. So let's just see how close I can get. And then
No. Oh, I think we lost you again. Maybe that lawnmower cut something. Oh. The stream couldn't handle a discussion of 99 characters. Can you still hear me? Can you guys still hear me? It says we're still live. Uh-oh. What is going on here? Alright. I cannot hear you. I see your text. Whenever it's a... yeah, I am getting no video from you right now. Yeah, let's try that again. Oh good, now Discord is causing us trouble. Do you guys want me to make lawnmower noises for the next hour? Let's see. It's trying.
Okay, hello.
Alright, let's see. Okay, yeah, there we go. Okay, so you cut out just as you were saying that you felt 99 characters was like a good number to put into the game engine.
Right. Okay. I'm trying to resume my train of thought. Yeah, so I tried putting 99 in, and it ended up working out about as well as I could have expected. Certain skills worked very awfully, particularly if I was trying to do a party-wide buff, because the animation would play on each character along with the sound effect, which meant that it, totally ruined me when I was wearing headphones. But it ended up actually working out pretty okay, and so I thought, all right, well, let's actually put in character models besides this one clone character that I have that is all 99 of these people. And so at first I just put in base assets to mess around with things. The initial character designs were really weird. One character was a ship, so they were weak to fire type damage and had a ton of HP and couldn't really do anything outside of if the certain characters like the pirate used a skill to make them function properly. But yeah, it was a really weird initial test. And so I thought, okay, well, let's actually change this up to where it's a bit more tolerable, like more, universal characters. And so I sat down and started doing character designs. And there were some that I had in my back pocket that I wanted to use for future characters. Like Arcturus and Chitty were character designs I already had. Like immediately was like, yes, this is going to be this person, this one's going to be this. Like, I need that psychedelic armor, I need that mohawk. Like, just certain character designs I were already really attached to and felt this would be a good fit for them. And then other ones, I looked around for a bit and was messing around with some generation stuff, and then eventually settled on designs for the rest of the characters. So I'd say it was about a 50-50 split. There were several characters that I knew, out the gate, this is what I want. And then there were others where I was like, well, I want them to be this type of class, but let's see what I can get working. The classes I decided way before most of the character designs. and then it was just about fitting them in through the rest of that in terms of art.
Okay. Let's see. Shark was asking, I guess, from a design standpoint, again, with your experience with like RPG Maker and like that kind of audience, I guess, what do you think makes the 99 character RPG kind of stand out from a design standpoint compared to the other RPGs? Because again, as we said at the very start, there's only this issue of so many games being released that it's very hard to look at one game and say this game is different compared to all the other games that are just like coming out at the same exact time. Uh oh. He froze again. Oh no. What is happening here? I don't know if this is a Discord or. Let's see. The connection shows that it's good. We have a ping of 20. That should be more, and no outbound packet loss. Maybe the lawnmower really did cut the internet line. Yep, I am not hearing you or seeing you right now, Damien. That is weird. Let's try. Let's see. It is starting to get. We're about an hour and a half in. Let's see. Let's try cutting the call again and doing it one more time. Very weird. I don't think the sound issue earlier was on his end. I think that may have just been like more OBS. But this seems like it's more internet related. Is that like the Dark Souls of lawnmowers? Dark Souls of lawnmowers. I think we just came with a new marketing strategy. Let's see. He's typing something. Oh, we're gonna have so many lawnmowers here in a few weeks. Maybe it is a Discord issue. I don't know. Let's try. Test
Hello.
that. Okay, yeah, maybe it's a Discord problem. I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay, but
we will eventually get through this.
we will try. So the question was, I guess, what do you feel makes your game stand out from the other titles, kind of in the RPG Maker scene?
Yes. Right, because I mean, 99 characters is nothing if, like, that's the whole thing. It's just a gimmick and nothing else. I would say the focus on, well, there's various teamwork skills and character diversity, sure. But really, it's the sort of combat isn't necessarily combat. Combat is just another way of interacting with the world. So there's, several levels where there's actually no combat. It's just like exposition, running around getting like potion ingredients and such. But there's a lot of things where combat is just a sort of way of resolving a roleplay scenario. Like with Dungeons and Dragons, for instance, you have attack rolls, but you also have skill checks where you're just comparing skills to one another, like opposing perception checks with stealth checks and stuff. This is sort of the same route where you're trying to figure out the right characters and skills to use to oppose the enemy and win in a scenario, whether it's actually combat related or not. So I would say that's the big thing that sets it apart.
Okay. And yeah, it's going to be very interesting, I think. I guess for you, Damon, do you see it going on to Steam at some point, or will it stay on itch?
I will go on to Steam once I know it's not immediately going to get, you know, forum bombed on Steam. Because, yeah, going on there with the art as it stands right now, I'm going to deal with everybody telling me how the art looks different. And also, I want to make sure there's enough gameplay to where if a person gets the game on Steam, they're okay with it, and I don't have to deal with any additional pressure to get the game out. Because right now, I'm making progress and I'm getting more and more levels out for people, but I don't need even more people telling me that right now. Like, I'm at a good place in, how many people know about the game and let me know about it. And I want to make sure that the game is, further along in development before I really ramp up to try and get onto Steam and other storefronts.
Yeah. And like we said, with so many games being released, you do have to stand out. Even from not just a gameplay standpoint, but just from a presentation point of view, if you expect people to give your game the time of day.
And that's the big thing, is I know that, just from the screenshots and everything, that's what gets people looking at the game. But then once they play it and understand what it is I'm trying to go for, then that's what's going to keep people with the game. And that's why the demo's designed the way that it is. Like, the 8 levels pretty well covers, the sorts of gameplay aspects that you'll deal with throughout the rest of the game. And, certain areas of the game definitely have more of one type of thing or another, but World 1's like a very solid balance and lets people know this is what you're in for. If you like it, feel free to buy and get the whole game, and if this isn't what you're into, okay, well, that's fine, and at least you know now. Because I do want people to buy the game, but I don't want people to be upset about buying the game. If I'm going to have somebody that's actually interested enough to play the demo, but not interested enough after that, then it's better to just cut it then and there and be okay with it. Like, I don't want people to be upset about that. And that's also another reason why I got a demo out. Not just because prototyping is important, but also because I know there's a lot of people that will look at this and think, well, maybe this is something I'm into, and then play it and go, no. And then, we can just part our ways there and be fine with it.
And I guess, how long do you see yourself continuing to work on the game? And I know you said earlier you're now kind of working on this full time. So I guess, what kind of, schedule do you think you have in mind for the game?
There's a lot of... the code's done. A lot of the enemy... a lot of the level designs are actually done. It's just a matter of implementing them. The checkpoints about... It's like an outline of levels that I have, where it's, this is the level, this is what happens, these are the characters that are involved, this is how it resolves. That's done throughout the entire game. As for the actual level implementation, that's going to take a bit of time. As for the, the art, the revamping that I'm going to have to do for that, that's going to take a lot of time. But I'm also spending, 50 hours a week working on this at this point. So I'm very hesitant to say how many months it's going to take, because after every month I'm like, well, it's probably going to take another month longer. But now that I've finally got that combat update out and I know more okay, what direction I really am taking this game in, how I want the interactions to happen, I'm feeling a lot better and really hitting my stride. So it's going to be by the end of the year, for sure.
By the end of the year being done, or by the end of the year being on Steam?
Oh, by the end of the year being done.
No.
I mean, potentially there's going to be a couple updates or bug fixes, but nothing like, oh, I've added this whole, 3 extra worlds to the game I was going to add anyway. It's like, no, that's going to be out and done. And I'm like, I've spent enough time on this to where, enough writing's been done to where it's just, I need to finish actually doing the designs, setting up how the levels will look in the game, putting the NPCs in, setting up the fights, fixing the art, and that's it. That's really all that needs to go into the game anymore, which is significant because there's a lot of NPCs, there's a lot of levels and systems to be put in place. Some of the levels are very unique, like there's a pirate ship battle where that's very specifically set up for how that whole interaction works out. But by and large, it's a lot to do, but it's not an immense amount to do.
All right. So it does sound like the game is finally kind of heading into the home stretch.
Yeah, like the end of the tunnel is visible. It's a ways out, but it is visible.
And I think that's that's a very important thing to understand for a lot of developers, because that's another big topic we could segue into. That kind of, what happens when you don't see the finish line, or even understand what the finish line of your game is. Because we've seen developers just go, again, they will spend years and years of their life on a game and have no idea when that game is done. They'll just keep adding more and more into it. Likewise, it can be very depressing to think, I've been working on this game and I still have an estimated 5 more years of my life to this title that I'm trying to make.
Yeah, it's, the very, very first prototype of this game was out about 2 years ago, which I noticed because, Facebook Memories was like, hey, remember this 2 years ago? I was like, oh, wow, that's, it's been very off and on, that I've been working on this up till the past, I want to say half year, really, because that's when the Kickstarter actually, went through, and I was like, oh, well, people are interested enough in this game for me to really, get my druthers about it and get it done. Because it's very easy to get burnt out on this project. A couple weeks ago, I was just dealing with the burnout of trying to figure out how do I keep this combat system interesting. What are all these enemy designs going to be and work out for and look like. And, now that I've gotten past that and now I can actually, I'm hitting that, I can actually see that light, and I'm going, okay, well, let me recheck my to-do list and figure out what else do I actually need to get done for this, because we're gonna get there, actually, so long later. But yeah, it's very easy to just get caught up in stuff and okay, this is a lot that needs to get done, but we're going to add this and we're going to add this. I've decided pretty long ago, okay, this is the way it's going to be. This is the whole progression of the story. We're going to have this much, and it's a significant amount, and that's why I'm saying right now that that's all we're putting. I did an outline and I said, okay, this is it. I'm not adding any more to this. If I try to add any more, I'm going to not do it. And I've actually subtracted a lot, or initially I had it to where characters had a lot of their own individual sorts of scenes, and I've trimmed it down to where a lot of them are, 2 or 3 character scenes, partly because that means I don't have to add as many levels, largely because those scenes work together best. Otherwise I'm spacing things out just to add more time to the game, which is complete bull. I want to make sure that what your time you're spending in the game actually gives enough progression for the player to feel like, okay, well, this was a nice little level to get through, and if they want to save and quit right there and get back to it later, they feel like they ended on a good note. rather than trying to get to the next bit or the next little thing. Um, so I've started rambling and I don't remember if I've answered what the question was or not. I'm sorry.
About kind of like understanding when the game is done and
Yes, right. So yeah, I decided long ago basically what I wanted the scope of the game to be, and I've just kept trimming down since then. And I've made sure not to add any more scope to it because it's very easy to add more things and then it balloons out of control, and I'm going to spend, twice as long working on this project, which nobody's going to want to play because it's so bloated. Like, if this game had a leveling system and a crafting system and a skill equip system and all these other things that initially I was thinking about doing, and then I looked at it, I was like, this is awful and I will not be able to actually do this. So we're putting these on a list of not to do's. This is the list that if I want to do something in the game, I look at this list, and if it's on there, I don't do it and we move on. Because yes, I have dealt with scope creep before, and I refuse to deal with it ever again. It's awful, and I'm very susceptible to it, so I put systems in place to make sure that I manage my time wisely and not do that.
And that is very important to understand in terms of understanding what makes your game work and was just secondary to that experience. Because like you said, like any developer has gone through, you can just keep adding mechanics and systems to your game until you eventually run out of money, or you jump off your roof because you can't think of how to get it all working. And some of the very best games we've played have had relatively simple gameplay loops that are just very engaging to play. At the start of the cast, you brought up, of course, Super Meat Boy. Super Meat Boy, from a design standpoint, doesn't seem that hard. But, again, they spent a lot of time hammering that down to the point that you can pick it up and you enjoy it. And I think, and just as a quick check here, we are approaching 2 hours, so I think we'll save the other topic maybe for another time, just because it is starting to get a little bit late. But to begin to wrap things up for this one, that when it comes to game development like this, it's very easy to spend your time working on a project that may only appear or only appeal for yourself, or again for a small group of people. But I think, but for a lot of independent developers, like I said, this is one of those things. It's kind of like a harsh pill to swallow. But there is a very big difference, I feel, between a commercial success and a critical or a personal one. And as we talked about earlier, with that kind of distinction between hobbyists and full game development, that you do have to understand just what the market wants as opposed to just what you want to make. And like I remember Sky Shine's Bedlam. This was a indie turn-based strategy game that came out, I think it was 2 years ago. It had a critical and a personal, very high reception, but that game just crashed the second it came out because the market just didn't like what this game was. And like we said, it's so easy to get caught in your own design like that, thinking that my game is great because I like it. And like I said, with the games we see from Itch, that as someone like me who's played so many games, there's so many titles on there that I don't want to give them the time of day because upon that first reaction, it's why should I give this game a look as opposed to the other 36 games that I'm seeing day in and day out? And with your game, you mentioned, of course, you had the Kickstarter that succeeded. I was looking at that as you were talking. And so it's good to know that there are people out there who believe in you and want to see this title go. But the same, unfortunately, can't be said for so many indie titles. And it's one of those issues that I don't know if there is a solution to this. We've seen talks about having curated stores, getting developers to understand marketing and PR better. But I guess, is this just a simple case of, the cream must rise to the top and kind of everybody else is going to sink? I know it's not an
No,
easy.
it's a fantastic question,
Yeah.
like outstanding question. Um, a tough one.
Yep.
This is um, I don't feel like the cream rises to the top. I've seen plenty of
Yep.
games where, I've played them and not even just like this is the game I'm into, but like I play them and from a design perspective, I'm like, this is objectively a fantastic
Yep.
game. But there's just not interest, or, I'll talk about a game and nobody has heard about it.
Oh yeah,
Um,
the people watching us live, they know that's never happened here on stream or with these discussions.
mhm. No, that's one thing I've actually noticed that makes me feel a little bit better is the fact that like I'll go there'll be like not GDC or some other thing where it's like an online event and they have a Discord, and so I'll go into the introductions and introduce myself, and somebody generally knows me usually and I don't know them, so I feel like, okay, well, I'm doing something right, but this is still really friggin' weird. um, because I don't feel like I know my game's gotten some visibility. I mean, honestly, that was one of the large points of the Kickstarter, was to get more eyes on the game. That it succeeded is really helpful to me because that pays for food and lodging and whatnot.
Yeah, of course.
But the main point of it was getting more eyes on the game. I'd finally gotten a trailer together and other stuff, and it was important to make sure that it got whatever visibility I could. Excuse me. And visibility on Kickstarter is pretty free. All I have to do is, post screenshots, post words about the game, make some goals, post the trailer, and, tell people about it. And now not only do I have, people that are looking at my games on itch or from Twitter or from Facebook or whatever, but now I have people that, go onto Kickstarter and look at my games. Because if you're marketing on a budget, you need every avenue that you can get. I've seen some people do that wrong, where either they just set up a Kickstarter page really poorly, or their Kickstarter fails, and so they cancel the page and then put up a new page, and that's just a bad look for everybody. Like, it failed the first time and you think you're going to give it a go the second time, that's just looking desperate, and people notice. But visibility's tough. Visibility is a really tough thing to, get in this sort of saturation.
Yep.
I hesitate to use the dreaded word indiepocalypse. But that it's something that people refer to and say, oh, well, this is how it is. It's like, it doesn't have to be this way. It's just, a lot of my time is spent working on the game. A lot of my time is spent looking at social media channels, understanding what other people are doing for their Kickstarters, understanding how the market looks for what I'm trying to do, what other RPG games are in the market and their release dates, and figuring out where I can shoehorn mine in to not, compete with theirs. Because if I'm hearing about it, they've probably got a lot more press than me, and I'm not going to win that fight. I don't want to have to compete with other people for sales for a game that, is important for me to be able to continue my livelihood.
Yep.
So it's a lot of, I spend a lot of time doing, just understanding the marketing, understanding how can I, parse my game design down as far as possible to just get the builds out. And then I can worry about fixing them later. But let me get something out for people to test. Let me get something out for people to look at, and then I can worry about making it pretty later, because I don't care about how it looks right now. It's not a full release. I haven't said it's a full release yet. But once I'm actually gearing up to do that, it's like, okay, well, I need to actually get together some art and do that. But at that point, it's just replacing assets I already have assigned, not the whole laborious task of assigning assets, checking collision, making sure everything works right with the functionality. I mean, I'll still have to test that because wonky things can happen with tech no matter what it is. But it's not going to be like, this part where I'm having to do everything, put it in for the first time. Um, so um, I don't think it's a cream rise to the top situation. I think it's a misunderstanding of marketing situation.
And that is a topic again that's another hour to two
Yeah.
hours easily. Again, game development is not something that can be solved in 10-minute long videos, as
Hmm.
anyone here who watches knows. But we are about to hit 2 hours, give or take, and I don't have time for another hour discussion because it has been a really great one with you, Damien. And if you are free in the future, we can certainly catch up and talk a little more about these topics. And as you get closer to the release, I think it would be great to kind of do like maybe like a post mortem and kind of see, how the finish line has differed from how you've gone through it. Because as we've said, no game design is the same, and likewise, no game has like a perfect development. That you know
Hmm.
exactly how things go.
Hmm. Yeah, no, that'd be a fun talk to do.
All right, but I think with that we are going to end things for this week. Before we do,
Hmm.
Damon, do you have any
Hmm.
social media that you would like to plug right now before we say
Um,
goodbye?
yeah, I mean, there's, the site, cannibalinteractive.itch.io. I'm on most places as developer Damien, Damien. Uh, but yeah, that's pretty much that.
All right. Well, Damien, it has been a great discussion with you, and it's good to hear that you're finally reaching that finish line.
Hmm.
And definitely the best of luck with finishing the game.
All right, thank you so much.
All right. If you wouldn't mind hanging on Discord for like 30 seconds after we say goodbye, I just have a few wrap up questions for you.
Sure.
But for everybody else watching, we are going to end things for this week's cast. So I would like to thank you for tuning in, whether it's live or recorded. If you're watching this recorded and would like an ad-free version of this talk, be sure to check out our Patreon, patreon.com/UWBlazer, to get access to those videos. I'll be back on later tonight for our regular game streaming. And oh, Shark says we need a lawnmower for the end. Here you go. There you go. That's the ending right there. But be sure to come back for daily discussions on game design here and on game wisdom, wares in the art and science of games, sans lawnmowers, and hopefully technical issues going forward. But
Hmm.
until next time, folks, have a great night, and I will see you all later.